He is presently Professor of Philosophy and Religion and Director of Studies in Religion at Christopher Newport University, Virginia, where he has received several recognitions and rewards for his teaching and mentoring. And he is also Distinguished Teaching and Research Faculty at the Graduate Theological Union, part of University of California, Berkeley. Garuda Das, along with his life partner and wife, Catherine Aka Krishna Kanta Dasi, is a co-founder of the Secret Yoga, for which he teaches workshops on the yoga of deep study of sacred yoga texts, philosophical foundations of yoga, exploring deeper dimensions of meditation, Sanskrit for the yoga, the Upanishads, the Yoga Sutra, the Bhagavad-Gita, and workshops on many other important themes. Let me tell you, this was a brief introduction of him. Perhaps it could have taken a longer time. Okay, so he has many feathers in his cap. So this was just a small introduction, and I made a feeble attempt to introduce such an exalted personality, who's not only acclaimed in the academical area, but also is a very wonderful Bhakti Yoga practitioner. So please help me in welcoming the very special and esteemed guest, His Grace Garuda Das, by giving him a big round of applause. As a part of the tradition.
Good evening. Hare Krishna. Well, it is wonderful to be back here. I spent many years of my life in this area. As Naranjana Swami knows, we go way back to 1977. Yeah, that's when I moved here. Yeah. I didn't see Naranjana Swami too often because he was always traveling and coming back here as a base, I remember. Yeah. Those are the old days. So I thought I would speak a little bit about my own experience of trying to explicate or deliver information about the Krishna Bhakti tradition in the academic setting, in the intellectual world. So I'll talk a little while, but then I want to open up for comments and questions. There'll be time for that, right?
We have plenty of time.
Okay.
Lots of time.
Lots of time, okay. So, the founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness was very interested in the scholarly opinions of Krishna Bhakti. In fact, he appreciated and was privileged to receive so many appreciations of his own books early on. His Bhagavad-Gita, published in 1972, received dozens and dozens of appreciations. This was very inspiring to Prabhupada. In fact, I remember he devoted some pamphlets to be printed up with their reviews back in those days, and he so much appreciated the academic scholars in the way they appreciated the authenticity, I think is the best way to put it, of what he brought to the world outside of India. You see, Prabhupada was the first person to bring Krishna Bhakti beyond the borders of India to the rest of the world. An extraordinary achievement, really extraordinary. And of course, he had the help of his early disciples, who also took great pains to bring the teachings to all parts of the world with him and erect beautiful temples such as this one. So what did he bring? What did Prabhupada bring? Well, aside from the externals that you see here, which are beautiful, and we have beautiful temples all over the world. I mean, extraordinary temples, and with altars that defy the expectations of any kind of beautiful scenery. I mean, the altars in all of the temples around the world are just so beautiful, just so beautiful. But why? Why do we have all this beauty around us in these temples? Because what Prabhupada gave us was a tradition of the heart. He gave us, first of all, Hridaya Vidya, knowledge of the heart. It is commonly known that the greatest striving in human beings is love. Prabhupada will explain that love is found everywhere. It's even found in the animal species. Once there were some, I believe it was in an airport, Prabhupada was sitting there, and some kittens came along and was playing by his feet.
Los Angeles.
Oh, was it Los Angeles? So was it outside or?
In the garden.
In the garden, that's what I thought. In the garden. So some kittens were playing, and he said, just see, there's love everywhere. And so it is ubiquitous. The Krishna Bhakti tradition that Prabhupada brought to the world is one that teaches about the nature of the heart and how to access the heart to be able to live a life of the heart. It is about perfecting love and not simply be satisfied with the worldly conditionings that will eclipse the true nature of the heart and have it become distracted into all kinds of directions. To be distracted by desires, worldly desires, to be distracted by worldly things and so many pullings, so many just endless distractions, as we all know, can be there. There we go. Is that good? Okay. Okay. Technical adjustment, ladies and gentlemen. So Prabhupada brought us the teachings of the great masters, the great rishis, the great seers from ancient times, the great medieval theologians and philosophers, and as well as the practices for living the life of the heart. So one man brought this all over the world. It's quite extraordinary. So what the scholars appreciated was the authenticity of this teaching and this practice. So while I was attending all those years at Harvard, which, as I think most of you know, it's across the river here, right? All those years, what they so much appreciated was the authenticity. In fact, back in the day, people like Harvey Cox, some of my professors, Diana Eck, Harvey Cox, John Carmen, they all came over here to see this temple. And I remember even one small thing. We have certain dietary restrictions that are there to facilitate the life of the heart. Sometimes diet or nutritional substances will distract one physically and mentally. So our diets are strict. And one professor, Gary Tubb, came to the temple, and I was going around showing different parts of the temple. And he was asking about our diet, and he said, what about garlic and onions? And I said, we don't eat garlic and onions. And for some reason, he was so impressed by that. And it's such a small thing, but the idea is that this was sort of a sign of the kind of appreciation of the authenticity of Krishna Bhakti as it's practiced here. Because the Shastras say that it is not good to have garlic and onions in the devotional life. These foods are not conducive to living out the devotional life. So even something as small as that, they were appreciating. What to speak of someone like Harvey Cox, one of the greatest theologians of the 20th century, who was a friend of mine and a professor at the same time. And in fact, he was the only one on campus who knew my Sanskrit name, my initiated name, Garuda Das. And many of you probably know who Garuda is, right? Vishnu's bird carrier, big eagle-like creature. And so Harvey knew he was the only one who knew my name. So whenever he would see me on campus, he said, "Well, how are you, Garuda? Where are you flying in from?" And I'd sort of look around to see if anyone else kind of noticed because what would other people think? You know, what could he be talking about? So that was sort of our inside joke. Where did Garuda fly in from to get on campus? So the idea is that there was a lot of affection for this movement, especially from professors right there across the river. And they used to bring classes. In fact, Harvey Cox forced his students to attend the early morning program, the Mangala Arti. He forced them to come at 4:15 in the morning to be ready to attend the early morning service at 4:30 in the morning. And he arranged this with me. And so I stayed outside starting at 4 o'clock greeting these very tired looking students. And I said, "So it was really rough getting up this early, wasn't it?" And they said, "No, we just decided to stay up all night." And I said, "Well, that's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to go to sleep early and get up early." He said, "Well, we all stay up pretty much till 1, 2 in the morning. We thought, what's another 2 hours, you know?" So I said, "Well, that's kind of cheating, but come in anyway." And so they, of course, living out the student life, figured it was just better to stay up instead of, try to get up early. So they were a little tired, but they were quite dazzled by the early morning program that is so sweet and so melodic and beautiful in the morning, and the whole arti and so on. They didn't understand much of it, but what they could understand is that this was really a very ancient practice that was brought here in its excuse me, without compromise. So these scholars were fascinated that right in their midst, right in their own town, there was, in some sense, a kind of display of this authentic bhakti practice. Bhakti meaning the offering of one's heart to the divine beloved. The offering of the heart. The word in Sanskrit for faith is shraddha. Shraddha. And the morphology of the word so beautifully explains what the meaning of faith is. And the shrad means heart, and dha means place. Where one places one's heart, that is your faith. So bhakti is about placing one's heart at the highest level. So it's not exactly about religion. It's about the human capacity and the human desire to place one's heart somewhere. Everyone places their heart somewhere. They place their heart in this or that or the other. But to learn how to place one's heart in the highest is what bhakti is all about. And every practice that takes place in a temple like this is celebrating that life of the heart. So you may not understand everything. You may not understand all these beautiful paintings. You may not understand the reason for various practices and so on, but at least know it to be something, that everything is something that facilitates the life of the heart, expanding the heart, growing the heart, elevating the heart to the highest. So there are not many religious practices that really focus on this kind of thing. Now, if you think about it, religions can be divided up into three major families of the world. So you've got the Semitic traditions, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So that's the Western family of traditions, or Semitic traditions. Then in the Far East, you've got the Buddhist, the Confucianist, indigenous traditions of China, Confucianism, Taoism, and Shinto. So those are the indigenous traditions of the East. Then right in the center, you've got the Vedic or originating traditions, which begin with the Vedas, the oldest sacred texts in the world. And from these sacred texts were built so many other sacred texts. The Shruti and the Smriti, as it's known. The original revelational texts, and then the texts that followed it were the texts of realization. So revelation and realization. And these texts keep flowing through the history of ancient Indian traditions. But what came out of India was, of course, what we call Hindu traditions. In addition to that, we have Buddhism, and we have Jainism, and then later on Sikhism came in the 16th century. All of these traditions have something to do with evolving the heart, but in different ways. But none deliver the teachings to elevate the heart to the highest level as Krishna Bhakti traditions. So we're very fortunate to be able to have this in our midst, and for Prabhupada to have brought this over to America. I think most of you may know the story of Prabhupada, how he came, and at the age of 70, I'm not 70 yet, but I'm getting there, and I can't imagine traveling the way Prabhupada traveled all over the world. And 12 times, I believe, he circled the globe. Was that right? 12 times? Yeah. And but each place stopping, writing thousands of letters, translating several dozen books, thick volumes, not just thin little ones that I write, the thick ones, and interacting with disciples, training disciples, putting these practices to work in all of the centers that he established. And not only that, but exemplifying bhakti. I went to the first Mayapur festival every year, right around the time of Gaura Purnima, also widely celebrated as the color festival. Holi, yeah, right around the time of Holi. Isn't it the same time, isn't it? So the first year that Prabhupada brought all the devotees from around the world together was in 1974. And I was just amazed at the different places from which so many devotees came. They came from England, they came from France, they came from China, they came from some of the North European countries, all over the place. And then the different ways that the Maha Mantra could sound with different accents also was very interesting to me. I remember the French accent. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare, Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Anyway, it was just entertaining to me. I mean, and then the German pronunciation, which I don't think I could repeat exactly. Anyway, all the different accents, but everyone was chanting the Maha Mantra. It was just this colorful sort of sonic palette of Maha Mantra chanting. And every day, Prabhupada would give lecture, morning and evening, And then some of us were able to go on morning walks with Prabhupada. And I remember when Prabhupada got to this one verse in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Jayatam surato pangor mama mandamater gati matsaraswa padambojo radha madanamohano. A verse written by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami in his Chaitanya Charitamrita, his beautiful Chaitanya Charitamrita, which speaks about how he is old and ill. He wrote this book at the age of 98. 98. And it's an extraordinary work. It's my favorite book of all books. I say book, but it's a voluminous text. And he's saying that he's ill, he's lame, he's senile, he's just completely broken down physically. But the lotus feet of Radha Madan Mohan are everything to him. Matsarvasva Padambojo Radha Madan Mohano. This kind of love, just emanates from these bhaktas. So recently I was in Vrindavan. I just got back a week or so ago, and I was there for just a few days, and I was at the Radha Damodar temple. And there was a pujari there who was, during Mangala Arti, I remember, he was performing Arti, and then afterwards he would sit in the sort of, I don't know what you call it, the sort of step down front part of the altar, not the immediate altar, but the mandapa, yeah. Okay, the mandapa. And he was sitting there listening to the bhajans, and this man went into ecstasy listening to these bhajans. It was just, I was stunned just watching him. I'd never quite seen anything like it. He was sitting there very upright, and he was just singing the words, and just, you could tell he was just meditating fully on the beauteous Lord, Radha Damodar. You see, in our tradition, there are three ways we think of the Supreme. He is supremely beautiful, he is supremely playful, and supremely delightful. And these primary attributes of the divine, which permeate all of this creation, by the way, there are things in this world that are very, very beautiful, but there are also things in this world that are very, very ugly and terrible. It's a mixed world. But still, as the Bhagavad-Gita explains to us, the divine permeates this world in all the famous I am declarations that Krishna makes in the Gita, chapters 7, 9, 10, and 11. So the Lord is supremely beautiful. He's also supremely playful. And, of course, in the month of Damodar, Krishna as Damodar was very playful with his mother. She tried to tie him, and the rope was never long enough. So this is Krishna playing with his devotees. And naturally, beings in this world are playful. We love being playful, right? There's the, we have here the Boston Red Sox, White Sox? What are they? Red Sox. Okay, so I'm sorry, I haven't been here in a while. Please, forgive me. Yeah, this is not in Shastra. I'm having to recall this from, very embarrassing. Okay, so anyway, so there's play there. In sports, there's playfulness. Human beings love playing. Even the animals play. In my backyard, I saw some deers playing around in my backyard by the lake. Playfulness is also ubiquitous, but also terrible interactions between human beings can take place in this world. Again, it's a mixed world, but yet playfulness will also permeate this world, and delightfulness, things that delight us, things that would, in some sense, literally light us up with happiness. ways of just delighting in the mystery of life itself. So while this world is very mixed, the teachings of Krishna Bhakti help us appreciate the divine even in this world, and to be able to see the divine in this world, to be able to prepare us for the divine that we can all go to in the eternal world. The only thing we can take with us from this world, the only thing, I mean, really, what can we take? The body, we will leave. You can't take anything of your household goods. You can't even take your toothbrush. Some people can't go anywhere without a toothbrush, and you can't even take a toothbrush, even though it's small. The only thing you can take is what is in your heart. It's the only thing we can take with us. We come into this world. Have you ever seen a baby human? You know, baby humans? Right. They're useless. Their limbs are floppy, so they can't function, they can't act yet, right? And as far as thinking goes, they don't think, but they love. They come in with the affective faculty. That's where we all start, as beings that love and that need love. In fact, they've done tests and they've done experiments. Some of them weren't intentional, but when baby humans, those infants that are so useless for anything but just loving, they die without love. Literally, they will wither away very quickly. Infants, without love, they die. As humans get older, if we don't feel love in our lives, we don't feel the love of the divine, we don't feel the love of other sweet bhaktas, then we slowly die, we slowly wither away. Human beings need love. And we look for it everywhere, but we don't always look for it in the right places. The teaching here is that when you love the highest, you can love the most in this world. You can love the most. And that is a great gift to give to everyone, is your love. I think in the end of life, one asks oneself, have I loved much and have I loved well? I think that's what sits with us at the very end. Have we loved much? So there's the quantity. And have we loved well? There's the quality. This is what, on our deathbeds, if we even have time for such a thing, a deathbed, notice that like the baby humans, our limbs are no longer functioning particularly well. As far as thinking goes, it's a little too late to think. If you haven't thought by that point, it's a little late. What's left is what you're feeling. Have I loved much and have I loved well? Don't wait for that point to try to learn how to love much and how to love well. That is what these centers are for, is to learn how to love much and how to love well and how to love perfectly. That is what these teachings are about. That is what this life of Krishna Bhakti is about. It's really quite marvelous. Back in the old days when temples were being set up, I remember in the early days when our Sunday feasts, which we still have, all over the world we have Sunday feasts. But back then, here's a nice little creature. It's very nice. There's a little ant accompanying me. Would you like to say something? Our process also teaches us to appreciate all sentient beings. They feel pain and they feel pleasure. There are some traditions in the West that think that animals do not have souls. Many Christians have told me animals do not have souls. I asked them if they have any pets at home. They said, yeah, we have a dog. I said, do you love the dog? Oh, yes. Oh, we love the dog. I said, well, does the dog love you? Oh, yeah. The dog really loves us. She's so dependent. She's so sweet. And you're telling me that there's no soul there? Love is only possible by soul. With the soul is the only way that love can come about, is through souls. So this is a process where we learn to love much, to learn to love well, and to love perfectly. That is our process. So we come into this world expecting love, desiring love, and desiring to love. And we leave this world hoping that we did love well and that we did love much. That is really what we came here to do, is to learn how to love. If we are fortunate enough to be in a tradition that really fully offers an exposition of this, then this is wonderful. Now, Prabhupada does say that all true religion, all true traditions do teach bhakti. He says this in several places. All true religion teaches bhakti. So when I teach bhakti, when I teach comparative religion in the university setting, I try to do exactly that. I try to show how bhakti exists in all true religions. Because that is, in essence, what all religion wants to get at. But even in religion, there can be distractions. There can be things that even move us away from that love, that message of bhakti in religion. And in fact, religion can get very dark. It can be misused. I love the few lines of a Sufi mystic who explains exactly what bhakti is in her own Sufi Islamic tradition. She prays something like this: "O Lord, if I pray to you in hopes of getting into heaven, please exclude me from heaven. If I pray to you out of fear of going to hell, throw me into hell. But if I pray to you for your own sake, please do not withhold from me your beautiful face." Love is ultimately selfless. To love God because you don't want to go to hell is to use God. To love God, to gain heaven, again, is not loving God for God's sake. Ultimately, true love, perfect love, is selfless love. Selfless love happens when the heart is so filled with love that you just can't do anything with it except just give it away. Just give the love away. And this was the example of Mahaprabhu Gauranga. The example where he couldn't even stay well enough in his own body. He was so filled with Krishna prema. He couldn't contain himself. I wrote about this in the back of one book, authored by Tamal Krishna Goswami. I wrote the last chapter. I talk about the uncontainable quality of Krishna bhakti. When a devotee leaves this world, a bhakta leaves this world, having developed so much love in his or her heart, it's because that they're bursting out of their body. They cannot contain all the love that is there. And that is Mahaprabhu's example in so many of the Leelas that you read about in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. A love that is so uncontainable that one has to just keep giving it away. Give as much love as possible. Why? Because there's not enough love in this world. There's not enough of that kind of love in this world. So there's so many things one can talk about in this process. Krishna Bhakti comes from that diamond-shaped country, India, out of which, of course, as I mentioned, the Vedic traditions, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. But within that Vedic tradition, grew this Krishna Bhakti tradition. And it influenced Bhakti in the other indigenous Indian traditions as well. And I'll just sort of wind up with this because I'm sort of preoccupied with this topic these days. I'm supposed to be finishing my book on the Yoga Sutra, and the executive editor at Yale she doesn't know what to do with me because I've already missed 4 deadlines. I don't dare tell my students this because I tell them that they must get their assignments in on time. So I'm confessing to all of you that I am a hypocrite. I miss not just one deadline, but countless deadlines to getting my book in, and I don't allow my students to miss any deadlines. So please don't tell, if you happen across any students, please don't even recount this confession. The reason it's taking me a long time to do this work is because most persons who interpret the Yoga Sutra, as Prabhupada himself speaks about in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in various purports, in his commentary, interpret it in a way that acknowledges the divine, but it gets distracted from the divine. And Prabhupada critiques these commentaries. I just read it the other day. And what I'm set out to do is to show that actually the ultimate state of yoga, as Bhagavad-Gita says in chapter 6, verse 47, Yoginam api sarvesham, etc., that the highest yoga is really one in which one attains rasa. At this level, yoga and rasa are synonymous. Yoga means union, and rasa means relationship. You can't speak about union without speaking about two. Otherwise, you can't speak about union. Can only happen when there's two. Two entities come together. So that the highest yoga is about rasa. And rasa means this intimate relationship with the divine. This is the ultimate achievement in yoga, as the Gita itself speaks about. I'm trying to show that actually the Yoga Sutra also speaks about this, but no one has really come along to show this. So yoga is mentioned about 150 times. I counted once in the Bhagavad-Gita, in its nominal and verbal forms. Yoga, the noun, and yukta. Yukta is the verbal form. In Sanskrit, you can turn any noun into a verb. So you could say, I practiced yoga today. Or you can say, in Sanskrit, the equivalent of, I have yoga'd today. But no one ever says that, right? I yoga'd today? No. It's the ed at the end of the, right? So, but in the Bhagavad Gita, it's talking about one who is absorbed in yoga. So there's the ed word, absorbed in yoga. What does it mean to be ultimately and perfectly absorbed in yoga? It has to do with the heart, as Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita. How many times does Krishna express the yearning of his own heart for ours? I counted 22 times where Krishna speaks the phrase, something like this, come to me. Come to me. Can you imagine having a conversation with someone, as Arjuna did with Krishna, where someone repeated something to you, not just twice, but 3 times? Wouldn't you consider that fairly emphatic? What about 5 times? 10 times? 22 times? Krishna is talking about souls coming to him. This shows a divine yearning that we have yet to hear. When we hear that yearning in the form of that teaching, that glorious teaching of the Gita, or perhaps the sound of Krishna's flute that calls us to his heart, then we understand that the Maha Mantra is the return call. Have you ever, picked up the phone when it was ringing and just like not said hello? How rude is that, right? Well, Krishna's calling us on his phone, so to speak, and we're just not answering. We just let it ring unless we turn to his call and respond with the Maha Mantra. That is what the Maha Mantra is about. It is the return call to Krishna. Krishna, I got your message. I got your voicemail, your flute call, and now I'm returning your call. Finally, after thousands of births, I'm returning your call. I know it's a little late, but better late than never. What we're busy doing here is returning Krishna's love call. It's not that we're chanting the Maha Mantra out of nothing, out of nowhere. It's a response to Krishna's call. It's such a beautiful practice. It is a beautiful practice. Anyway, there are so many things that we could talk about. I'd like to open up, I think, for questions and comments, if that's all right. Would that be all right? Fine. Okay. I'm just a visitor here.
Fine too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you are and you're not. Yeah. Swamiji is, visitor and not a visitor. That's right. So, any questions or comments really about anything, except mathematics? I'm not good at math. Yeah, let's go here and then we'll go here. Yeah. Speak nice and loudly.
Okay. You spoke a lot about like us loving God. So my current worry is like finishing off my student loans. How is loving God going to help me finishing off my paying back my student loans?
I have that same worry as myself. As many scholarships as you can get to go to Harvard, and there are always loans, there are always expenses, right? When I've paid mine off, I'll call you and let you know how it was. Yeah, Gandhi is, the story about Gandhi was a gentleman came to Gandhi and said, Gandhiji, my son is eating too much of the sugar. He's eating too much of the sugar. What do I do? He said, come back in 2 weeks. He said, okay. So he came back in 2 weeks. He said, Gandhiji, remember me? I'm the one whose son is eating too much of the sugar. What do I do? He said, tell your son that I said, stop. Gandhiji, I waited 2 weeks simply to hear you tell him that you said, stop? Why I had to wait 2 weeks? He said, because I was still eating sugar. So the idea here is practice what you preach, right? Confucius is actually the first one to ever say this in world literature, in the Analects of Confucius. He said, you must practice what you preach. So I'll have to pay off my loans to tell you how I did it devotionally. Here's the thing. Now to respond seriously. There are so many practical things that we have to do in this world. There's strains and responsibilities and this and that and the other. And even as a renounced monk, as we have the Venerable Naranjana Swamiji here, he has to deal with practical things. But for the sake of bhakti, it's worth it. It's worth it. That is a tapas. That is an austerity we undergo for the sake of creating, wonderful aspects of our lives that are totally saturated with the bhakti process. So, your loan, you're presumably for gaining a profession, right? Okay. May I ask what that is? Computer engineer. So you engineer computers. I always wondered how that works, but anyway, Anyway, this is beyond my pay grade. But look, Prabhupada said in a purport in the first canto, page 268, how about that? That no matter what field of endeavor you are trained in, no matter what field, it could be computer engineering, it could be poetry, it could be biology, whatever. He went through so many different fields of study. He said, whatever it is, if it is offered to Krishna, if you learn how to offer that to Krishna, then it is Hari Kirtan. He repeated this 3 times in the same purport. I've never seen Prabhupada do that anywhere. 3 times. There we go with the repetition thing again, right? But this is 3 times in a small purport. Krishna had 5. Krishna speaks 575 verses in the Gita out of the 700. So he could repeat himself, come to me 22 times. Prabhupada in one little purport 3 times repeats this idea that whatever you do, well, then there's yat karoshi rashnasi yat jahoshi dadasi yat in the Gita. Whatever you do, whatever you perform, whatever activities that you perform, do as an offering to me, Krishna says. The art of learning how to offer everything that you do, even paying back the loans, how to offer that to Krishna. Now, between you and me, that is the hardest thing to figure out ever, okay? I admit. But that is even there. Everything we do, the more we fill our lives up with Krishna Bhakti. And this temple is filled with experts on how to do that. So if you live locally, learn from the experts, the devotees who have been studying how to do this, learning how to do this, striving to do this. Learn from them how to even spiritualize the paying back of student loans, which sounds terribly dichotomous, but it can be done. Fill your life with bhakti, and even the repayment of student loans is a good thing. Yeah. Good. Thank you for your question. Your question, however, did put a lot of anxiety in me because I still have a little bit of student loans to pay back after all these years. If you can believe it. I paid my kids' student loans back before I paid mine. So there you go. I'm with you. Sympathetic. Next, yeah. Real loud. Oh, I'll repeat the question for those of you who can't hear in the back.
Okay, so you said that when you leave the body, all you take is the love that you have. What about the mind? When you leave the body, what happens with the mind?
Okay, the question is, so I claimed earlier that the only thing you can take with you when you leave this body is the heart. What is in your heart? And this gentleman is asking, well, what about the mind? Well, technically, when one does leave the body, it is only the outer shell of the body that one leaves. One does take with oneself into the next body, technically, when one transmigrates or reincarnates. The difference between the two words, reincarnate technically means going, it's intraspecies, intra-human species. So it means leaving one human body going into another human body. But transmigration means you could go into, an animal body. You go from an animal body to a human body. So I love, in my classroom, I always love telling my students what they were in their previous lives. They think that I actually can, I tell them I can actually see this kind of thing. So I tell my worst students that they were a snail and a worm and a rat and so on. My better students, they say, you were a fine horse, a racehorse, and so on. So I try to be encouraging and discouraging in these ways. But seriously, the mind does go, the accumulative abilities that are stored. What is the mind? The mind is the repository of all pleasurable, painful, wishful, and fearful experiences. It's also the repository of great skills and capacities. How do you account for a Mozart who composed his first piano sonata that people still play today at age 6? Honestly, what were you doing at age 6? What was I doing at age 6? I was lucky if I could go out and stay on my bike, for a block or two. Extraordinary things. What about that Korean kid who knew calculus at 2? At 2. I was still drooling on the floor at 2. Calculus at 2? You see, the mind, those things get transferred. But these things that get transferred are still sheaths or coverings that can distract us from what we really need to be developing is our heart. Because this is what we can take with us eternally. Wolfgang, I'm sure he's somewhere. I don't know where, but I don't know where he is. But did he develop his heart for the eternal life? That's what we have to ask ourselves. Is it the short term or the long term? Are we going to invest in things that are fleeting? Even writing symphonic orchestral pieces is temporary. As wonderful as it might be, as extraordinary as it might be, this is not what the eternal life is about. So it's shreyas or preyas, long term or short term. And what truly satisfies is what is long term. Short term things are fleeting, and we're never ultimately satisfied. So the mind, the stuff of the mind, does transfer to the next body. And not just good stuff, but the bad stuff also. The karmic debts and the karmic benefits and so on. But love is something that goes beyond all of that. That's the whole thing. Did you want to add anything to that, or?
You caught the.
I got the. Okay, fine. Yeah. You always can jump in here. Yeah.
I'm enjoying it.
You're, okay, good. Yeah. So it's the heart. If you want to develop your mind, then go across the river. If you want to develop your heart, don't go across the river. Stay here. I know it's across the river. We had an old joke, as you know, MIT is at one end of Cambridge and Harvard's at the other end. And the Massachusetts Avenue connects the two. So the joke goes that there's a grocery store, a little grocery store, and there's a fellow with a grocery cart. He's got stuff just piled up on the groceries are falling off the edge of the grocery cart. And he goes into the 10 items or less aisle. And he finally pulls up, and the lady says, "What's wrong with you? Are you from Harvard and you can't count, or MIT and you can't read? Which is it?" So, reading is important, math is important, and these are activities of the mind. And obviously this guy was out of his mind, right? Goes into the 10 items or less. But the point is, where's the heart? It's amazing that we can establish, human beings can establish the greatest edifices of education, these huge institutions. Harvard is the richest school in the world by far, of an endowment close to $40 billion. And you can go through any curriculum there and not learn anything about the heart. The humanities move us closer to the heart, of course. Great literature and so on, Shakespeare. Yeah, but really, the direct teachings of how to develop the life of the heart, where do you cannot find. Isn't that so ironic? I mean, for that matter, through all my, 3 master's degrees and a doctorate, no one ever taught me how to change the oil of my car either. Well, now it's impossible. They're so computerized, we have to call this gentleman up who hasn't paid his student loans back, get him to help change the oil in the car. Everything's computerized now in these vehicles. But where do you learn about how to love? Well, parents. Prabhupada says the parents are the first guru. That's your first guru. Now, sometimes our gurus are not real good. Sometimes they're really good. I had really good guru parents. They really, really wanted me to be successful, not just in worldly ways, but they really wanted me to learn how to be a good human being. They really emphasized that. So I started reading Bhagavad-Gita at age 14. Not Prabhupada's. I was reading several different translations and editions. And when I turned 15, I went to my parents and I said I'd like to drop out of school. They said, what? They were very educated people. I said, I'd like to drop out of school. I'd like to drop out of high school. They said, you want to be a high school dropout? I said, yes, I do. Why? What are you going to do all day? I said, I'm going to read Bhagavad-Gita. That seems to me to be the best education. I mean, compared to what I'm learning in school, everything's there in Bhagavad-Gita. I'm just trying to learn it, though. I need more time. Well, they had a lot of faith in me somehow, and they let me drop out of high school. And then it turned out that I realized I needed to learn some Sanskrit to really understand what's going on and wanted to go. So I ended up going back to college a year earlier than my peers. But no one really knows how I did that. Because you have to have a high school diploma to go to college. Well, I didn't have one. And I'm not going to tell you how it happened. It's really too embarrassing. I'm not going to. It just, this is why I think Krishna had, this could only happen once. I mean, Krishna, I think, knew that I was supposed to be a disciple of Prabhupada, a very fortunate thing, and that Prabhupada would then want me to go into the intellectual realm to establish the teachings of Krishna Bhakti. Because I made my own high school diploma. Okay, this is how it happened. I was loosely associated with a hippie free school. 2 guys from Yale came down to Washington, D.C., where I grew up, started a free school. And frankly, I didn't like it very much because they would sit around reading Hegel, smoking dope. Later to find out that it actually helps to understand Hegel if you smoke dope. That's a different issue. I'm not going to cover it. And I don't recommend Hegel or dope, honestly. But these are other issues. Anyway, Johns Hopkins was asking, he said, we have your SAT scores, we have everything, but we don't have your high school diploma. I said, I don't have one. He said, well, you have to have one to get into Johns Hopkins. I said, well, can you let me in anyway? They said, no. So you take a GED. Now, back then, no one knew what GEDs were. It turns out you had to be 19 and a half years old in Washington, D.C., as a resident in Washington, D.C. I said, I wrote back, I don't want to wait 3.5 years to apply to your school. So they said, look, we don't care. I took them very literally. We don't care how you get one, but you have to have a high school diploma. I take people at their word. So I went to one of the directors of the school. His name was Joel. I said, Joel, do you guys give out diplomas here? I mean, he said, sure. And he had a spiral notebook, where you rip the page out and it has all the ugly little, he tore a page out of a spiral notebook, turned it on landscape side with the lines going up and down. He said, draw one. I said, you're kidding me. He said, no, I'll sign it. We're incorporated. So I literally drew my high school diploma. Tell me that, Krishna and Prabhupada didn't have an arrangement for me here because. So I drew it, and he said, "Put a line here for me." I said, "What are you called here?" He said, "Director." And then he said, is this complete? He said, no, put another line here. We have to have a witness. I said, who's that going to be? He said, well, Fred's upstairs. I said, who's Fred? He said, Fred is one very intoxicated human being. I said, do we really have to have Fred sign my diploma? It's the only high school diploma I'll ever have. And he got Fred to come down. He was just incapacitated. And I hated the drug culture. I just was not part of it. I practiced yoga, and I read yoga philosophy. Anyway, Fred stumbled down the stairs, and he signed my diploma. I mailed that off to Johns Hopkins University. Well, 1 month went by, didn't hear anything. A second month, a third month. In late June, way past the time you're supposed to hear from a university, I get a letter saying, congratulations, you've been admitted to Johns Hopkins University. I thought I was now intoxicated. So I took the letter to my mother. I said, does this really say what I think it says? She said, sure, it does say, yeah, you want to go? I said, sure. She said, pack your bags, let's go. That was that. Krishna has a funny way of doing things. You know, your student loans could be just as funny in its own way. But, I mean, strange things happen, you know? We're here. All of us are here to learn the lessons of love if we're willing to listen. I think back on those times and I think, so was Krishna preparing me to perform the seva that I've been doing now for 50 years? It's wonderful to be able to see how the parts of your life come together for the purpose of growing one's heart, to be able to give to others. The greatest gift to give is Krishna Bhakti. It's the greatest gift. Prabhupada was asked, that's famously known by John Lennon. He said, so you're a guru, so show me some miracles. And back then in the 60s, you know, miracles, I mean, Autobiography of a Yogi was the most famous book back in the day. We read it, you know, and the book's filled with miracles of this happening, that happening, and so on. In fact, so many miracles were happening, it got a little tedious for me, honestly. Too many miracles, you know. Anyway, so I'm reading along this dialogue that Prabhupada is having with John Lennon, and Prabhupada immediately said, these are my miracles, pointing to his disciples. That is a miracle. And, you know, if you want ash to come out of your hand, you know, and stuff, I don't know, what do you do with ash? I just throw it back in the fireplace. What is that? You know, you have a vision. Well, sometimes visions can be devotional, but the main point is Prabhupada pointed to his disciples as miracles because his teachings, his example, transformed their hearts. As Rupanuga Prabhu once said on the original film on the movement back in the day, he said, there are many, many Bhagavad-Gita translations. And now as a scholar, I know that from 1785, Charles Wilkins was the first person to translate the Bhagavad-Gita into English in England. Dozens and dozens and dozens of Bhagavad-Gitas have been there over the years. And Rupanuga in the film said, but the only one that actually changed the hearts of people was Prabhupada's Bhagavad-Gita. So this is the miracle of Krishna Bhakti. To change the heart of a person has got to be the greatest miracle ever. Standing on one foot, you know, for 15 years, that's got to be hard. But what's harder than that is, what do you do with that? You know, having your arm raised for 50, you know, I've seen these people in India, right? Raise these physical austerities. But what do you do with that? Go within. That's the lesson of the Bhagavad-Gita. You know, the Bhagavad-Gita is an amazing, you can never read Bhagavad-Gita enough. And it's funny because I teach world religions, comparative religion, that's my degree, is what Prabhupada spoke about, how this would be a great accomplishment if we can compare all religious theses to Krishna Bhakti and show the great value of Krishna Bhakti. So, but I teach, when I go into the Bible, it's, it starts like a scripture, the way you'd expect it. God, created the heavens and the earth. Very grand, right? The New Testament starts off with various genealogies leading up to Jesus and how his manifestation is there and, is meant to be. And, or God was the Word and the Word was God and it was, so on. But all of these, fantastic. And the Gita begins with Arjuna having a complete mental breakdown. That's an interesting way to begin a scripture. He has a complete mental breakdown. The outer world was presenting him with an irresolvable ethical conflict. He could not resolve this. He was damned if he did fight, he was damned if he didn't fight. He tried to work it out in his mind. So the outer world, the interactive world, precipitated an inner world machination of the mind. The mind. Should I do this? Should I not do this? Every ethical stance he went through, even the Western philosophy of ethical positions, are subtly there in his review of what to do. The utilitarian ethics, deontological ethics, virtue ethics, intuitionist ethics, all of those things were considered by Arjuna way before Western ethics as a discipline came into being. And Arjuna went through all of that, and finally, this inner realm of the mind, I should say, the mind is all over the body actually, and he couldn't figure that out, and he felt his heart just shattered. The end of the chapter is where Arjuna's heart is totally shattered, and he finds himself totally incapacitated. This is the way Bhagavad-Gita begins. This is the way our great scripture begins. Because Arjuna is every person. We all can find ourselves absolutely devastated by what goes on in this world. And if you think about what goes on in this world, as privileged as all of us here are, most of the world is covered in extraordinary suffering. So the first chapter of the Gita asks us all, how do we act in a world of conflict, pain, and suffering? This is what the Gita challenges us all. There is no way that we can solve things on an ethical level. That's the tacit teaching of the Gita. No matter how much you work out your ethical systems, your ethical philosophies, your ethical views, you will never satisfy the problems of this world with a system of ethics. So Krishna says, be a yogi. Go within. Find the answers within. Be strong within your heart. Develop your heart. Hear my love call. I've been asking you to come to me many, many times. Do you realize who's sitting in front of you? Do we realize who's sitting in front of us? Arjuna turns to Krishna. He completely reestablishes his relationship with Krishna. And Krishna gives him the greatest secret of all, his supreme message. Sarva guyatamam Booyah Srinu me Paramon Jaha. Ishtosi me dhritamiti tutau vikshami teyatam. 1864. The greatest secret of all, my supreme message, and he puts it in quotation marks, an iti clause. Ishtosi me dhritam. You are so much loved by me. It's right there in the Gita. It's right there at the very climactic point in the whole text. But can we hear it? That is the challenge. I put not just before all of you, but before myself. Gita, an amazing text. Only 700 verses. The Bible is 31,000 plus verses. The Quran, 11,000. The Gita is only 700. And it challenges us. Can we turn to Krishna can we receive this greatest secret of all. Why does he keep it secret? I was, in between classes on the university campus. The walkways are crowded, honestly. They're crowded. So I was walking behind two young ladies who were students. I didn't know them. But I was eavesdropping, okay? Honestly, I was eavesdropping, okay? But this is what one said to the other. One said, "Does Mike still love you?" And the other one said, "He better, or I'll kill him." I was startled. If Mike professed his love for her, it was under duress, under force of circumstance. And that's not love. You can't manipulate, coerce, threaten, love. If you can, it's not love. And if Mike was honest with her and said, "No, I don't love you," well, then he would be killed by her. He said, "You better, or I'll kill him," right? Prabhupada, taught us that love cannot be forced. It comes of its own accord. It issues forth naturally as the heart matures. And only then can we really offer our hearts to others and the divine. Any other last comments or questions? I realize I went back into lecture mode after the question about the mind and, of course, the very upsetting question about the student loans. Any other comments, questions before we close shop? Swamiji, do you have anything you'd like to correct on what I said or add or anything you'd like to? Yeah, here, yeah.
I have nothing to correct.
Oh, okay, then good. Give me a pen. Okay.
Thank you for a very, very nice presentation. You captured the essence of Prabhupada's vision.
I was hoping you'd say more than that. I mean, not about me, but about the topics, the content. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Okay.
Is it okay to ask one more?
One more?
We have 5 minutes to left. If you
Okay. So,
we need to wind up.
Yeah.
with that love, somebody comes to the temple, okay, some new person, or
Yeah.
somebody who is coming 20 years and does not develop love. How to help such a person?
Okay, the
What
question.
would be-
Yeah.
What is the essential point for us devotees who come on regular basis or live in the temple?
Yes.
How to introduce that love?
Yes. Question is just briefly summarized as, how do we understand someone who, after 20 years of practice, may not, at least apparently, be evolving that love? Well, first of all, it's very hard to judge from the outside what one loves on the inside. This is a very, very, secret place. The Booyah, the heart is also understood as a Booyah, as a cave. The Upanishads speak about the heart, the space within the heart. This is a Hridayakasha, is the phrase in the Upanishads. So, if on the outside we're judging a person on the inside, that is almost impossible to do. But certainly, we can judge our interactions with that person. Do I feel a upliftment when I talk with that person? Or do I feel drained by talking to that person? So, our relations we can judge. But sometimes, we have our own rate of evolution. Some of us will bring all kinds of karmas into this life, but others of us will be able to do more of a fast track. But in light of eternity, these differences don't matter. If someone takes up the practice of Krishna Bhakti, someone appears to be still Kanishta, someone appears to be Uttama, someone appears to be Madhyama. I mean, these different rates of success in bhakti. It's all perfect. It's all successful. Every imperfection we each possess is a perfectly arranged imperfection, because it's where we need to grow. So you may be discouraged. I have so many imperfections. Well, you know what? Appreciate how perfect those imperfections are for you. They're designed to help you evolve your heart. So you should be happy with the imperfections. I'm absolutely delighted with mine. Well, not all the time, but some of the time. Anyway, I thank you, the temple administrators, and for sharing tonight, allowing me to share tonight, to meet all of you, and to be back here. I have a great, great attachment for this temple, as I spent 13 years trying to get out of across the river. The way I made it through 13 years of across the river is by coming across the river in this direction. That's how I made it. So thank you very much.